When it comes to Kemi Badenoch, I think there's mood music and then there's the anthem, and it's very difficult. Her Manchester speech landed well in the hall, and when she was being interviewed about the empty chairs and empty tables, it's like something out of Les Miserables, isn't it? She said, well, why not look at my speech? Why are you looking at the speech of, what's his name? Ken Stride or something, I can't remember his name. It gave the faithful a clear target and a clean slogan: scrap stamp duty on primary homes, rip up the 2008 Climate Change Act, tighten welfare, promise a smaller state that lets strivers keep more of what they earn. The room cheered, the country didn't. Even before the conference closed, public ratings of her leadership were weak, and the brand problem among the under 40s remained acute. YouGov found only 1 in 5 voters say she has been doing well, and with nearly half saying that she'd been doing badly, and that's an indictment of both messenger and message. Now, to the issue of her inadequacy, I think, needs to be analysed. First, her credibility. Abolishing stamp duty on main residences sounds bold. It's also unfunded in practice. The take from stamp duty has hoovered around it's hoovered up around 10 to 11 billion pounds a year. That's it. And she gestures at very large spending cuts several years out to pay for it. Well, it's vague numbers today, pain tomorrow, benefit maybe later, but that's not a plan, it's an IOU. An independent analysis warns that scrapping stamp duty without supply reform risks being capitalised into higher prices. In short, you can remove the friction and watch sellers pocket the gain. And that helps agents and incumbents more than first-time buyers. It's the opposite of serious housing reform. The fiscal maths, the second problem, her so-called golden rule, says half of any savings will cut the deficit and half will fund tax cuts. Well, fine slogans are not fiscal anchors. And after 14 years in office, her party missed debt and borrowing targets in cycle after cycle, and while layering on gimmicks like stamp duty holidays that juiced prices, it's the credibility, or the loss of credibility, has been cumulative. And is perishable, and this leadership has little goodwill and trust to spend. The third issue is the policy incoherence on climate and energy, and repealing the Climate Change Act is marketed as a consumer rescue, and in reality it telegraphs instability to investors who must finance the grid, storage, nuclear and renewables build out we will need, whatever our ideology. Universities and policy institutes already called out factual errors in her attack lines, and Oxford warned the repeal case is likely to be a political and economic own goal. Cheap energy doesn't arrive by tearing up a framework that underwrites capital. And she ought to have learned from the Brexit disaster that a negative doesn't automatically produce a positive. In this case, the energy thing arrives by de-risking long-term private investment, and scrapping the law would raise the risk premium and embed higher bills. This is not conservative, it is vandalism. The fourth point, the lateness on the demography that matters. Her boosters talk about suburban strivers and optimistic millennials. Quite. The outward look shows a path back only if the party is competent, prioritises cost of living and housing, and looks distinct from rivals. She has yet to meet any of those tests. You cannot court 30-somethings with cheaper transactions while leaving prices and rents structurally high. You cannot lecture about social mobility while treating universities, renters and young families as convenient props. And you certainly cannot cut through with the under 40s if your signature climate line is rollback, not reliability. The research itself says the brand is not toxic, but invisible. And she mistakes applause for cut-through. She is trying to outflank Labour while also holding off reform, and the polling narrative of this autumn is that reform owns insurgency energy, Labour owns competence by default, and the Conservatives are struggling to look either competent or fresh. YouGov's party perceptions review is brutal on distinctiveness, while other trackers show the Tory vote regularly slumping to third or fourth. Being third is bad, being fourth is existential. Her stamp duty line may dominate a conference cycle, it doesn't shift a national cycle. So what would adequacy look like if not this? It would start with a housing offer that is not fiscal confetti, restore supply to 350,000 a year through a rules-based land market, green belt swaps and serious transport-linked densification. If you must recycle a tax, shift from transactions to land value with a long glide path and protections for low-income owner-occupiers. Then stop importing volatility into energy policy. Look for a cross-party settlement. Lock it in on grid, nuclear, and storage with 25-year contracts and a single permitting spine. That is how you lower bills without gimmicks. And if you talk strivers, match the rhetoric with childcare, skills and a migration system that is coherent rather than theatrical. That is how you rescue a centre-right case with actual content. Instead, we have dramatics, and amateur dramatics at that. A promise to scrap stamp duty without confronting price inflation and supply. A promise to scrap a climate law without confronting investor risk. A welfare squeeze that chases headlines while ducking cost drivers in health, disability and housing benefit. And a party history that she will not interrogate with the necessary ruthlessness. On climate, she attacks Cameron. On borders, she nods to promises that were not kept. On housing, she condemns a tax rather than a broken development model. It is a museum of conservative errors calculated as if new. And then there is the character test she set herself. She presents as frank, witty and sharp. Good traits if she had any of them, but candour is not the same as competence. Warmth in the room is not the same as breadth in the country, and courage is not the same as picking fights you already know your audience enjoys. The job is not to entertain the hall, the job is to persuade the sceptical middle that your numbers add up, your tone is modern, and your party has learned. She has not yet even done that. And a word on fairness. Her admirers say that she has the courage to defend success. Fine. But the social contract is not a sermon, it's a system. And if you want to reward work and family formation, you must lower the fixed costs that block them. That means house building at scale, childcare that doesn't consume a second salary, and transport that expands labour markets. Scrapping a transaction tax does not deliver those things. It simply moves chips on a table that is still tilted. And finally, the clock. Politics has tempo. Labour spent a year occupying competence. Reform spent a year occupying revolt. She is trying to occupy principle. That might have worked 2 years ago with a coherent record. Today it reads as late, derivative and thin. And when even friendly commentators admit that the Tories can say almost anything because they have nowhere any chance of having power, you are not leading a government in waiting. You are presiding over a fan club. And the verdict, she's not without talent, she's not without courage, but she is inadequate to the scale of the country's problems and late to the generation that will judge her. Scrap the gimmicks, fix the systems, earn trust, and until then the applause in Manchester is a mirage on a long, hot road, and at the moment it looks as if it's going nowhere.